Hey folks, before we dive into today's episode, we want to let you in on a little secret. This recording is pulled from one of our live weekly webinars, a component of our precision medicine training program where the real magic happens. This robust 6-month program equips you with the knowledge and skills needed to navigate the dynamic landscape of genetics-based healthcare and the wellness industry as a whole, for that matter. Better yet, you can claim CME credits and qualify to be National Board of Health and Wellness Coaching certified. Curious to learn more? Head over to wildhealth.com/education or reach out directly to our team by emailing us at education@wildhealth.com. Now, let's get back to the good stuff. Thanks for tuning in.
So we are super excited to have Ariana with us today. So Ari is a licensed and registered dietitian nutritionist. She has multiple passions in life, but her work-related passion and specialization really falls into two main categories, like functional medicine and sports nutrition. And today, she's going to be breaking down on pros and cons of nutrition tracking. And this is, if any of you were on a little bit before we hit start, this is an area near and dear to my heart. And Ari and I have chatted about it before, but I always get something out of Ari's expertise. So Ari, thanks for joining us again. And I'll turn it over to you. I'll keep an eye on the chat. And yeah, thanks again for blessing us with your wisdom and experience.
Thank you so much. It's always fun to hang out with all of you guys. I know most people on the call today, so lots of familiar faces, and please feel free to engage and ask questions and have a conversation as we go through. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So we're going to talk a little bit about macronutrient and nutrition tracking and kind of the pros and cons of that today. So today we're going to talk about using macro and nutrient tracking in practice and kind of weighing the pros and cons of obviously tracking in general, but also some other considerations, some best practices, and just some things that I've learned along the way in working with my patients. And I feel like it's very personalized. And so as we go through this, just keeping in mind that there are certain things that will work for everyone, certain things that pieces and parts will work for one person, but not for the other. So today, just looking at what we're going to talk about, I wanted to just start us off by talking about what is macronutrient and nutrition tracking and what does that look like. And then we'll dive a little bit into the pros, the cons, some alternatives to tracking, and then some examples and case studies. And then I'll just end by some best practices and just kind of tying a bow on everything and answering any questions that you all have. So first and foremost, what is macronutrient and nutrition tracking? So there's a couple of different ways that we can look at this. The most common searches or terms when thinking about macronutrient tracking is if it fits your macros or flexible dieting, but it's basically just a fancy way of monitoring calories. And so most people do this by monitoring grams or percentages of your proteins, fats, and carbohydrates as part of your total energy or caloric intake. And this is often balanced with calorie expenditure as well, which Mike was alluding to in the beginning when we're talking about activity tracking and how that integrates with what you're putting in your body and how we can find that balance in relation to your goals. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be an app that we're using to track macronutrients. It can also be a food diary, a food frequency questionnaire. There's a lot of other validated methods that is used in research. Tracking in an app version is not one of those, which we'll talk about why. But I'm going to mostly focus on macro tracking in apps because that's what most people are doing these days. And macro tracking is just short for macronutrient tracking, just to kind of bring that home. And then nutrition tracking is also, it's more than just macronutrients. So some people are focused on proteins, fats, carbohydrates, maybe fiber along with that. We can also look at nutrition tracking from other specific goals. So things like tracking sodium, tracking other vitamins, minerals, or phytonutrients. And when that would be appropriate is something that we'll talk about as well. So people are often tracking for a couple of different reasons. One is goals around body composition. So body composition refers to weight gain, weight loss, building muscle mass, and seeing progress in any of those areas. We also might look at tracking for athletic performance and then for specific health conditions. So in an individual who maybe their health report says they're really sensitive to saturated fat, so we're looking at grams of saturated fat that we're consuming per day kind of as a learning experience. Another health condition that this could be helpful for is for somebody who is recently has been told that they have insulin resistance or is trying to look at the amount of carbohydrates that they're consuming. This can also be really helpful for prediabetes, diabetes, insulin resistance goals. And there's a lot of other health conditions where this could be useful, but those are kind of the top ones that I see. So some of the pros, I skipped a slide here. Some of the pros of tracking. So we can look at nutrient tracking just to guide or get a little bit more precision in dietary planning. And that can be in relation to some of those goals that we talked about. It also can be really supportive of specific body composition goals and then give us a lot of food education just about portion sizes and content of our foods. So a lot of people think they know what they're eating, but when they start tracking, it's really eye-opening in terms of what they think they're eating compared to what they're actually eating. And as a nutritionist, I thought that I knew exactly what I was doing. And then I started tracking and I realized that I was pretty far off as well. So even if you think you're the most experienced person in the world in terms of nutrition habits, I think tracking could still be beneficial for you and just recalibrating your brain on what is an actual portion size and what are the foods that you're actually consuming on a daily basis. It also can allow for some flexibility in the diet. So a lot of people that I've worked with have come from some restrictive dietary patterns, whether it's different versions of elimination diets, whether it's Whole30, maybe a paleo diet, maybe ketogenic diet. There's a variety of different, more black and white type nutritional tools that people have used, especially when they're focusing on weight loss and don't really know where to start. And so when they start macro tracking, which I'll talk about in some of my case studies or examples at the end, they really see that they can have a little bit more flexibility. And since we're using tracking as a data collection tool, not necessarily like a pass fail, like you're doing great with hitting your goals every day perfectly, that's really not realistic. We're usually using this more as data collection. And so by getting this data, we're really able to see what are foods and what is the breakdown of foods and composition of our meals that works best with the goals that we're trying to achieve. And we use a lot of other factors like how do you feel from an energy standpoint? How do you feel in your workouts? How are you sleeping? How is your digestion? How is your energy throughout the day? And scale, of course, can be a tool as well. And so using the data from tracking your nutritional intake along with some of those other tools can really help us to guide a very personalized approach, which can be really helpful. And there have been a lot of studies, so I'm not just making this stuff all up. There actually have been studies that have shown that self-monitoring, including weight and diet tracking, is actually a significant predictor of successful weight loss and long-term maintenance of that weight loss. Now let's talk about some of the cons of tracking. So if you've ever done it before, you know that especially the first couple of days, it can be kind of tedious and time consuming. There's a little bit of a learning curve, whether you're using an app or you're just having to stop and write it all down, especially if you're doing it kind of meal by meal and snack by snack. And then if you're also trying to weigh and measure those foods, that adds an additional layer that can cause some people to feel like it's just taking up too much of their time to be worth it. And then another con is potential negative impact on their social life or mental health. So I have a lot of individuals who have had a lot of anxiety about, family gatherings or social events when they're not able to really know what they're going to have or what's in the foods that they're eating. So it can definitely place a little bit of a burden on mental health for certain people. And then it also, depending on the method that you're using, might not emphasize food quality and micronutrient balance, reducing nutritional diversity. So I've experienced this firsthand, and Mike, you may have as well. When I'm trying to hit specific targets, I sometimes limit the amount of diversity in my meals because I like being able to just like click, like copy the previous day and not have to do a lot of additional finding the food in the database, adding the portion size. So for some people, they tend to kind of stick to the same meals over and over again, or just limit the amount of diversity that they have. And then depending on the app that you're using, like MyFitnessPal is very macronutrient focused, where it's really looking at, did you hit your targets for carbohydrates, protein, and fat? And then something like Chronometer is an app that is actually more highly focused on micronutrients. So you can see how close you are to your, nutrients that help with immune system function or mitochondrial function. So it's a little bit more detailed and can kind of help to really focus more on micronutrient diversity and goals there. And just another caveat is I don't recommend tracking for people who have a history of an eating disorder or who are still struggling with eating disorders, especially without professional guidance. And so there is a time and a place, I think, for tracking, even in individuals who have some disordered eating patterns. For some people, having that as a tool has been really helpful in my experience, but you have to know the person that you're working with and be really sensitive to any particular behaviors that become unhealthy. And then another big con here to tracking is just the inaccuracies that can happen. And there's a lot of discrepancies in different databases that they're using. And a lot of the data, especially in MyFitnessPal, is actually user generated, meaning people are putting in that data, which allows for a lot more user error. And then if anyone's ever tracked, you might have experienced, if you just enter something like, say, sweet potato, it's a healthy food. You think that it's a medium sweet potato according to the database's standards, but you actually compare that with what's on the scale and you find out it's actually an extra, extra large sweet potato. And while that's still healthy, depending on what your goals are, that could be adding a lot of additional calories, a lot of additional carbohydrates compared to what you thought you were doing. On the other hand, a lot of our food labels, especially if you're eating a lot of foods that are in packages, there is a lot of variance in what's actually in those products. I think they allow for 10 to 20% variability in what the packaging actually says is in that food. So if you're looking at a protein bar and it says high protein and it says protein is 12 grams, well, it could actually be less or more than what you actually think it is. So if you're trying to really focus on a protein goal or build muscle and you're not seeing a lot of progress, you might actually want to pay attention to how much foods you're eating out of packages versus whole food sources. And a lot of people actually like using foods in packages because it can just be a quick barcode scan into the into the tracker that you're using. And it's a lot more, you have to be a little bit more diligent about doing whole foods and actually getting an accurate number by either weighing it on a scale or putting it in a measuring cup or something like that. Not everybody has to do that. I think when you start out for the first week or so, it can be really helpful just to make sure that you're having an accurate picture of what you're doing. But I don't expect everyone to throw everything on a scale or a measuring cup for the long term. So who's going to majorly benefit from tracking? So certain people might benefit more than other people. And I alluded to this in the beginning, but those with specialized needs, especially higher level athletes or those who have very specific body composition goals, maybe they're going into a physique competition or someone who is in a weight-based sport, like weightlifting or wrestling or something of that nature. Individuals who are interested in more detailed nutrition analysis. It can also be used for short-term educational or health purposes. And then a big one that I use food tracking for is for symptom tracking. So I get a lot of individuals who have a lot of digestive symptoms or are struggling with potential food sensitivities, and they're not really sure what's causing their symptoms. And so I oftentimes start with food tracking, whether it's keeping a written food log associated with those symptoms or tracking for a week or so in an app with some detailed notes. There's a couple of really good apps actually for symptom tracking. And that can be really helpful for the individual to assess what their daily patterns look like and when those symptoms are happening. But it can also be helpful to have a second set of eyes and have me actually look at it from another perspective and say, hey, you're really having a lot of these symptoms during the week when you're at work versus on the weekends. Do you think stress might be contributing? Or do you think that you're eating really quickly at your desk for your lunch, but dinner you're sitting down with your family and having a lot more mindful meal? And all of that can play into someone's symptoms that they're experiencing and just their food experience as a whole. Some other considerations for using tracking most effectively, we want to make sure that we're using the data in a meaningful way. So for individuals who just start entering their foods into MyFitnessPal, they're not automatically going to see success if they're not using that data in the way that's intended to be used. So because you're tracking and you're noticing that you're hitting your protein goal, but you're getting it from all packaged foods and protein powders, that might not be a super useful way to, or that might be really eye-opening for some people, but for other people, actually looking at those other extraneous variables like weight on the scale, like body composition, like performance I mentioned before, can be one way that you're using that data. So you want to make sure that you're employing tools for efficient tracking, and so you get the most out of that data that you're tracking and being able to adapt and be flexible with changing what you're doing over time. Sometimes that means working with a qualified professional. So I have a lot of individuals who read a lot online, listen to a lot of podcasts. So they start adopting a lot of the lifestyle behaviors of those that they look up to. A lot of these fitness influencers or health influencers, which is great, but not everyone is the same. So if you are entering targets because someone says that you have to be low carb, high fat, and you're not seeing progress, it might be hard to really identify what you need to do or feel confident with it. I know I used to be kind of a low carb person. I was told I need to increase my carbs. It scared me because I thought that I was going to lose progress. I thought that I was going to feel terrible. And so I actually started working with someone who helped me be like, it's okay. And as I was tracking it and seeing progress in my fitness and my body composition, it empowered me to continue to use that data and see how that data correlates with the goals that I have. And then it's helpful to use it for a period of time as a learning tool, but it's not intended to be used forever. So you want to make sure that you're not feeling super attached to that particular tracking mechanism, or you're not experiencing anxiety on the days that you can't or the days that you didn't. And so I think all of those are important to keep in mind for the long term. So if someone is not a candidate for tracking, or they've been tracking for a while and they're looking for something a little bit different, maybe they've met their goal and they're looking for sustaining that particular goal over time, are there effective alternatives to macro tracking? So a couple of things that you may have heard of. The first one is called habit-based nutrition coaching. And habit-based nutrition coaching is implementing small, manageable changes in daily behaviors that are related to eating and lifestyle rather than strict dieting or macro counting. It emphasizes a gradual adoption of healthier habits, making it easier to maintain long-term changes, learning and incorporating one new habit at a time, reducing the overwhelm and increasing the likelihood of sustainable lifestyle improvements. And it's also preferred because it's simple. It's more simple. It can be more practical, especially for busy individuals. And it really has a focus on overall well-being rather than a focus just on weight or body composition. And so habit-based nutrition coaching might be setting a goal around drinking water while your coffee is brewing. Or it might be something like, let's try to get half of your plate fruits and vegetables with every meal, for example. The next one you've probably heard of is intuitive eating. And intuitive eating is based on physiological hunger and satiety rather than just external cues. So in a macro tracker, you might see, hey, I have 50 grams of carbs left at the end of the day. I better eat 50 grams of carbs before I go to bed, even if you're not hungry. And intuitive eating can really focus on using a hunger scale. Am I hungry? What are those hunger and fullness cues that I can use throughout the day when I'm not necessarily attached to a number that I'm trying to achieve. And the benefits is that this can encourage a healthier relationship with food based on the body's needs, again, rather than rigid dietary rules. Something very similar to intuitive eating is mindful eating. And a lot of times these are used interchangeably. But this involves paying attention to the eating experience and focusing on sensory awareness of food. This teaches you how to really pay attention to your body and mind and pay attention to how you're feeling when you're eating. So this might be checking in with yourself before, during, and after your meals, eating till you're 80% full, and really focusing on, the mouthfeel, the sensations, what went into actually preparing that meal, and really using that to eat in a way that serves your body. So another question that comes up is, can mindful eating and tracking coexist? And yes, absolutely, and it should. So mindful eating can coexist with macro tracking by providing qualitative insights into dietary habits. These can be used together when mindful eating is providing qualitative insights and macro tracking offering more quantitative data. So by using those together and really paying attention to when I hit my protein goal, I feel great. I feel empowered. I feel strong. And using that even after it's time that maybe you feel like you don't really need to track anymore. You become really familiar with what those portions look like, how you feel when you hit those goals versus days that you don't, and using that data together. And you can also combine macro tracking with other methods. So this is a popular approach used by the Precision Nutrition certification. And so this is more using or eyeballing hand portions. So this is something that individuals can use when they're out to eat or after they've gone through a period of time where they've established what their body needs in relation to their goals. They might use, the hand method, a palm-sized portion of protein, fist size is about a cup of rice or oatmeal. The finger is about a tablespoon of peanut butter or nuts or oils or what have you. So a couple of real world examples of when I've used macro tracking or nutrition tracking and see it be really beneficial. The big one that's coming up recently is around holiday eating and holiday parties. And I have actually a patient that I saw this week. She was really beating herself up about feeling like she fell off track at a holiday party over the weekend. And she was really upset because she felt like, I had more than one portion of certain things that I know aren't healthy for me. I was just doing it because it was there. It was close by. And then I asked her, well, did you still log it? And she said, yeah. And I was like, well, that's awesome. What did you learn? She said, I learned that I went over my calories. She's like, but I didn't feel good when I went out for the second portion. I didn't really need that second portion. I was satisfied with just one. And I found a way that I could fit that into my calorie goal if I stuck to that. So it allows you to kind of plan for that. And it just brings a little bit more awareness when you know that you have to enter something. You're providing that accountability. And it's not necessarily right or wrong. If you go over your calories, it's all about a learning experience. And it's about just the awareness around it. And it also can kind of cue into other social cues. So she also mentioned that she really only did it because everybody else went up to get seconds and she didn't really need it. And she identified that because she was going through this process of really paying attention. Another one is identifying triggers. I have a lot of people that we've looked through their diet log. They're eating a ton of foods that are considered fermentable foods, and they're getting a ton of bloating, a ton of digestive upset, things called FODMAPs. So that's another really insightful tool that we use for people with digestive issues. Again, stress at work. We always kind of come back to those other factors that maybe aren't food related, but are really impacting digestion. And by logging or tracking those foods along with when you're feeling not so great can be really helpful. I've had a lot of examples of performance increases. I really started to pay attention to the quality of my diet and my meal timing, and I had so much energy in my workouts. I was PRing like crazy. And then the last one is kind of the idea of flexible dieting and not having to be so rigid, and finally seeing progress while also being able to enjoy meals out with the family, go to social occasions, and having that balanced approach is something that nutrient tracking can also provide. So a couple of other best practices as we kind of round out the conversation today. It's really important to set individualized goals. So these individualized goals, whether it's help with a professional or it's setting goals that you've kind of went through. So the way that I approach this is I have people track for a week or two. And that's just to establish a baseline. Because if they've never tracked before and they come to me with a goal of, I want to lose X number of pounds by next week, I'm like, well, is that actually realistic? So I ask them to track for a couple of days. Let's get a baseline. Let's see what your food composition or your meal composition looks like, and we can tweak it from there. So setting those individualized goals and also being willing to adapt those goals based on progress is important. Different phases of life, different times of the month, different situations, different activity levels all play into this. And we're not going to have the same exact calorie goal or even macronutrient breakdown for our entire life. So being able to adapt to that. Using reliable tools, focusing on overall patterns, prioritizing whole foods as much as we can, balancing both flexibility with discipline. Again, I mentioned regular review and adjustments. The education and the data collection can be really helpful. And then integrating that with mindful eating over time once you feel confident with what an ideal diet looks for you. Any questions? Comments?
That was a crash course and amazing. Thank you, Aria. It was incredible.
Hey there, quick question for you. Have you enjoyed learning about precision medicine? Are you ready to expand your knowledge, incorporate genomics and epigenomics into your practice, or start a health coaching career? Wild Health's Precision Medicine Training Program is your golden ticket. And guess what? For a limited time, get $1,200 off when you enroll this month by visiting wildhealth.com/education or by emailing us directly at education@wildhealth.com. This 6-month National Board of Health and Wellness Coaching accredited program covers genetics-based healthcare and offers up to 50 AMA Category 1 CME credits. With only 2 enrollment periods annually, don't miss your chance to join us. Engaging live webinars, personalized mentoring, and hands-on training kick off next month. Secure your spot before it's too late. We cover topics including autoimmune disease, detoxification, intestinal permeability, training, nutrition, micronutrients, supplements, hundreds of SNPs, and more. Don't miss this exclusive offer of $1,200 off when you enroll this month by visiting wildhealth.com/education or emailing us at education@wildhealth.com.